The lost generations are all the generations that have gone before. Older millennials, Gen X, the boomers. You can see the signs of neurodivergence in those generations. You can see it in the alcoholism rates. You can see it in the divorce rates.
Yes.
You can see it in the early deaths. The people who tried to make it through life with self-medicating, with alcohol, with food, with intense exercise, or whatever it is they've done to survive. We're learning so much more about how we differ, about how the school system, which is standardised, is going to not work for the hidden 20%. Let's get to the point where we don't have to traumatise those kids.
The Hidden 20% won Best Interview Podcast at the British Podcast Awards, and we couldn't have done it without you. Thank you for your support. We really want to do more, so follow, subscribe, and let's get this message out to more people. Our next guest is a renowned organisational psychologist. As the founder of Genius Within and the creator of the Genius Finder, Professor Nancy Doyle has been at the forefront of transforming how companies support neurodivergent employees. She's been shining a light on neurodivergent stories in her Forbes articles and in her BBC series, Employable Me. Given Nancy's been in the ND space for the last 2 decades, it was fascinating to get her take on the status quo. Let's get into it. Let's see how great minds think differently. Nancy.
Hi.
You have done so much work in this space, so much good for so long, over 20 years. So knowing what you know, how do you not leap to, come on, guys, we've got to sort this out. Come on, this workplace is wrong, or this is not set up right, or you're not doing it right.
Okay, so if you'd been in this field for over 20 years, you wouldn't be seeing lack of change. You would be seeing phenomenal change. Okay. This has gone from a word that nobody used and a concept that nobody agreed with to something that is actually a potent force for change. And I am super proud of how much that has changed in 20 years. I'm super proud to have been a drop in the wave that has come through. And I think, we've done an amazing job to get it that way. Do I still get angry? Yes, I get frustrated because there is so much more still to do. But actually, anger and frustration have always been an amazing creative force for me. You know that thing, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So low on serenity, high on courage, working on the wisdom. And so it's a huge driver. It's my career. We're talking about my career.
Yeah, it's your life's work.
Yeah, it's my life's work. And then the other thing, of course, that I've done is the thing that you've just done, which is the Genius Finder.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
So the Genius Finder is a way of working out what you need. So you answer the questions. The questions are psychometrically designed, which means they've gone through several iterations, and we've worked out which are the items that are the most reliable, that do the best job of identifying what we're trying to identify, which is the sort of underlying psychological construct, of which there are 13, including sensory needs, creativity, memory, self-organization, that kind of thing. So you go through and you answer these questions. They're what they're asking you is how easy or hard you find particular tasks at work. So very, very concrete examples of work tasks. Do you find this easy or hard? And then what it gives you is a spiky profile of the areas where you're confident and the areas where you're not confident. And then you can see those challenges. And then it pairs those challenges with a range of 430 strategies that are the kind of things I've been using in coaching for 25 years. Yeah. So it might be something as simple as being brave enough to interrupt a meeting and saying, do you know what, I'm getting a bit lost. Could we just have a recap of the action points? Yeah. It could be trying a new kind of scent in your concentration space. It could be wearing noise-cancelling headphones. It could be anything like that. But I've got 430 of those ideas, basically, at least. Yep. So it pairs you with which of those ideas go with the problem that you've identified. Yep. So you can start working on those and it will filter them for you. But the really important bit for me is nowhere in there does it say, by the way, we think you're dyspraxic.
Yes.
By the way, this is an ADHD profile.
Yeah, there's nothing in having gone through the questions.
Nope.
If I didn't know you and I didn't know anything about neurodivergence, etc., I kind of it's applicable to everyone in the workplace.
Which has three purposes. The first purpose is I don't think it's safe to diagnose people online. I think it's a concern.
Yep.
So the kind of spiky profile that you might have if you were an ADHDer, you might also have if you had attachment disorder or if you had hypothyroidism. So without a background, that spiky profile probably shouldn't be attached to a diagnostic label.
Yep.
It might stop you getting the help you need because you don't go to the doctor. Do you see what I mean? It's risky. So the second reason for not having neurodiversity all over it is because we want you to be able to print that report off and go and talk to your boss. So if you're looking for a way to talk to your boss to go, oh, there's some things that would really work for me. I need to kind of have a conversation about I'm really struggling with self-organization.
Yep.
It used to be okay because I used to take all my work home, but I can't do that anymore because now mum's in hospital and I have to go and visit her every day. How do I have this conversation? So you can have the conversation without disclosure.
Yes.
You can
you don't legally have to disclose neurodivergence anyway.
Totally. So you can just go, look, do you know what? I've done this thing. These are my strengths at work. I hope you agree. These are the things I'm challenged with currently. And here's some ideas of things I'd like to try to get better at that. Can you support me? What could we do? Could we have a conversation about it?
And the third one?
And the third one is because actually, lots of the same things that apply to neurodivergent people apply to lots of other people.
Yep.
So that sort of spiky profile experience, you might have that if you're returning from work after having cancer treatment.
Yeah.
You might have that if you're in perimenopause.
Yep.
You might have that if you've got chronic fatigue or long COVID. So why limit it? Because actually it's relevant to a much wider range of people.
And presumably it's as relevant to a employee or team member as it is to a manager in terms of, I don't know, I could imagine saying to someone as part of a review, hey, a really good way to kind of, we could look at this, challenges, weaknesses, strengths, all the rest of it is through this lens.
Yep.
If you want to go and answer these questions.
Exactly.
And by the way, here's mine and here's what I find great, difficult, etc.
Totally. It makes it easy to have difficult conversations because that's one of the things I see coming up again and again and again. And then people don't have the conversations. And so the time they try to start is when it's too late and there's a capability assessment or a performance management or, a redundancy round or something. And at that point, the relationship is ruptured. Even if you could fix the performance, which we usually can, by the way.
Yes.
95% of our coaching clients keep their jobs. 20 to 30% of them get promoted within a year. It
works.
It does work. But what we can't fix is the relationships when they've gone that far down the line.
Why do we struggle with these difficult conversations at work?
Well, we're British.
Yes, I take that as a reason.
So as British people, we struggle with any conversation like that. But I think it's because we don't have the language for it. I think it's because we use language like, you're not very confident. You need to be a better influencer. You need to be more diplomatic. And because those things have such vast ranges of interpretation as to what that actually means. What's the behavior that goes with that? What does that look like? Because how it looks to me might not be the same as how it looks to you.
Yeah.
I think I've been told many times that I'm not diplomatic, but in other respects I am. There's often occasions where I'm incredibly diplomatic.
Direct communicate. I am accused. Accused may be a bit of a strong word. It is noted that I have a very direct communication style.
Yeah.
And I know sometimes that can veer into bluntness and insensitivity. But on the flip side, I don't gamble and I don't bet, but I could imagine my team and anyone that I've worked with would say they know where they stand.
Yes.
And that I give clarity.
Yes. Yeah.
And so maybe sometimes that's hard to hear for people, but...
And if you and I were working together, I would find that relaxing.
Okay.
I would find that really I would find that diplomatic.
Let's have a quick look at my spiky
Let's do it.
Profile.
Yeah, so reading concentration, sensory needs, self-organising and manual dexterity are things that you might want to do some strategies to get a bit more control over.
I mean, I basically score really low on the sensory. What does that mean that my lowest score was in the sensory section?
You're highly sensitive to your environment. So it could be that it's your visual sense that's kind of overwhelming you, or your auditory sense, or maybe the sense of people moving around you affecting your balance, which we call your vestibular sense.
Okay.
So, it could be any of the senses, but it's the extent to which those distract you or make it hard for you to work.
Yes.
And so if that's what's happening for you, you need a series of strategies and scaffolds, particularly when you're doing difficult tasks. You might be
Yes.
okay on a day-to-day basis,
Yep.
but you might need to think to yourself, right, this particular bit of admin that I have to do on a regular basis, maybe once a week, I have to write something up or tot something up. I really struggle with that task. If you know that you've got high sensory needs, sort those out before you try and do that task.
Yeah, and I find the sensory piece with the push and pull of autism and ADHD like a constant juggling act of sort of, if you picture me being where I work at home and I've got my noise cancelling headphones on and I've got lots of distractions behind me but none in front of me, and I can get deep into, an Excel spreadsheet and get lost in numbers and deep thought, and then I see someone or literally a squirrel outside because it's just fields and forests.
Wow. So it's very much your visual field of what's in front of you, that it's your peripheral vision, isn't it?
Yeah,
Things that come in.
As long as I've got the noise cancelling piece.
Yeah, my hearing's like that. I can tell the difference between music that's being streamed versus music being played on vinyl.
Okay.
Yeah, it feels different.
Yeah.
Music streamed is sort of thin and reedy, and it feels sort of sharp and not soft.
Yes.
Whereas music played on vinyl feels round and embodied.
Yes.
And when I feel it through my whole body rather than just my ears or my head.
Yeah.
It's a completely different experience.
Yeah, I've noticed that even just having the noise cancelling effect, regardless of having any music or anything on, sometimes the physical action of putting the headphones on tells me to change, to concentrate, to focus, to...
It's become an anchor for you to go into that state. Yeah. I'm the same with silicon-based earplugs.
Okay.
So I've been sleeping with earplugs since I was 16 years old.
Wow.
In fact, it's the only way I can sleep.
Wow.
Prior to the earplugs, I didn't sleep very much at all because the noise of the trees would be too loud or what have you, So as soon as I put those earplugs in, it's like my body's signal to go to sleep. And it does, it doesn't always work. Obviously, ADHD, neurodivergent, insomnia,
Sure.
sleeplessness is a lifelong challenge. But yeah, without them, it doesn't, I can't even do it.
Yeah, it's all those rituals, isn't it?
Yeah, rituals.
They're signals that kind of go, it's that kind of time now to do this.
And there's lots of strategies actually that I've written that are like that, creating rituals for yourself. Try this 3 times and see what difference it makes.
Yes.
And if you like it, carry on doing it.
I think what I see or I pick up from sort of the world of neurodivergence in the workplace is backlash is again too strong, but this idea that, hold on a minute, there's not special cases here. You can't have your own office and you can't have your own lighting and you can't have your own, and I can't do everything for the individual is sort of one aspect. And then the second one is this, do I say anything at work or do I not? What is going on today in the workplace with employers and neurodivergence?
I mean, I think there is a bit of a backlash, if I'm perfectly honest with you. I mean, having worked in this field since 2002, I've, in my early career, I used to have to bash doors down to get people to talk about the positive aspects of neurodiversity.
Yes.
No one wanted to know about that. No one was interested. Then everyone was interested. It was massive fashion and fad. And now you can start to see the cracks. You can start to see, but I think the cracks are there because people aren't doing a good job of targeting adjustments around performance. Adjustments aren't favors. They're not help. They're not kind of, a thing that you do. The most popular adjustments don't even cost money. That's the most ridiculous thing, right?
What are the most popular
The most popular adjustments are flexible hours, remote working. They're all sensory. They're all sensory. They're all about, can I buffer my sensory environment so that I can concentrate?
Yeah.
They're all that. So, they're fairly free. They're just about kindness, flexibility, giving people the benefit of the doubt. But really, they're about performance enhancement. What I actually want, because with this adjustment, is I want to be able to do my job more easily and to the best of my ability.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to reframe it as that.
Yeah.
These are performance enhancing techniques.
Reasonable adjustments is such a horrible phrase.
It's become stigmatized, hasn't it? I know.
It becomes fair. It sort of feels legal.
Well, it is legal.
Yeah.
It is legal. It's in the Equality Act.
Is it?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the phrase. That's where it comes from.
Okay.
It comes from the Equality Act and its predecessor, the Disability Discrimination Act, and in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities talks about reasonable accommodations.
Yes.
So, it is a legal term, and the reasonableness of it is, could an employer reasonably be expected to make this change for this person? And that gives it some flexibility. So as a small business, you might not be expected to make quite so many changes as if you were a very large, well-resourced business, for example. So, that's where the reasonable comes. And it's a grey area. It's really difficult to work that out. But yeah, I think it's become stigmatized. And I think but that doesn't mean we should just start talking about performance enhancing strategies, because that's also a little bit, gung-ho, beast yourself, presenteeism. It's got that element to it as well. But I do think we need to talk about the fact that adjustments are there so that people can do their jobs. That's the purpose of them.
And for an employer who is after performance and a motivated, high-performing team with not lots of people leaving and not lots of sick days and not, all of these things, it feels now to me biased, obvious, of like, well, why wouldn't you want to do?
For the want of some noise-cancelling headphones and giving Jane permission to not have to answer the phones for half a day on a Friday so that she can concentrate on her report and stop losing her place, could we not just say, do that? Yeah. Absolutely. And I think this is inefficiency in the cost model of how we support neurodivergent people and all disabled people, actually. When the adjustments are so easy to kind of manufacture and create and enact, why are we spending thousands of pounds giving people permission to do that? It just doesn't make sense to me. We spend thousands of pounds diagnosing, workplace needs assessing, or educational healthcare plan assessing.
Yes.
And then we might send out some specialist technology or some coaching. And at the end of that process, we go, right, well, what this person needs is, they need permission to work from home on a Friday. They need a whiteboard so that they can do their to-do list as a mind map instead of a list. They need a reading stand so that they can put some paper up there when they're trying to copy it from the written material into the computer. And you just go, right, okay, does any of these things cost more than 50 quid? No. So why have we gone through this ridiculously drawn out process? So that is what I'm trying to change. I'm trying to flip that cost model and go, right, here are all the easy things.
Yes.
Here are all the easy things you can do that don't cost money. Let's work out how you get to them. Let's send you there. And then it's only if those things are not helpful enough do you then scale up. So it's kind of flipping it from a gateway model to a triage model.
Yeah.
That's what I think we should do.
The basics, simple steps, don't cost the earth, don't take loads of time. These are no-brainers.
Totally. And I'm not alone in this. There's some educators are doing this as well. About the same time as I was inventing the Genius Finder, I went to this conference and I found a bunch of teachers in Portsmouth who had pretty much decided to do the same thing because they were fed up of waiting for their kids to come back with the HCPs when they could see quite clearly what the kids needed.
Yes.
So they produced a booklet of common flexibilities. And they ended up issuing it to all of the teachers in Portsmouth and just going, basically, here's a list of things you can do. If you've got kids in your class that would benefit from this, you don't need to ask for permission, just do it.
Yeah.
And that has now turned into it's explosive. They've got a network of like 600 educators across the UK that are all trying to do this. It's come grassroots up. It's come from people like me, but in education, we're working every day. We see what people need. We know how straightforward it is. And it's so often the same thing for so many different people.
Yeah, it's scalable in that sense,
Totally.
right?
So why are we not just doing that? And then there are still people who will need more, but we'll have more time and money for those people because we'll have cleared off all of the kind of easy to sort needs. But the other reason I like it doing it that way is that your first pass at doing something is something that you can do yourself, that you can feel empowered and independent with. Whereas if you go through the assessment as a gateway route, you're always dependent on an expert to come and tell you what to do. And it actually disenfranchises you. By the time you get to the end of that process, you've got a bit of learned helplessness. You're like, well, I've got all these things and there's nothing I can do about it. So I just have to wait for someone to come and sort me out. Or I just have to, not have to do those things anymore because I can't do them because they're really hard.
Yes.
So let's not start there. Let's start with what you can do to improve those areas. So anyway, that's my soapbox. I'm on it.
Why are, and correct me if I'm wrong on this stat, why are 40% of neurodivergent adults unemployed?
Ooh, that's a very good question. It'll be multifactorial, of course. I'm a psychologist. I'm going to say it depends because that is always the answer. It depends. But the kind of factors that are affecting that, I mean, the biggest one's got to be school, hasn't it? I mean, goodness me, the number of people that come out of the education system fully believing that they have nothing to offer the world of work when that is simply not true.
Yeah.
Because the school system is based on 5 skills and 5 skills alone. Are you literate? Are you numerate? Can you do fine motor control handwriting? Can you sit still and concentrate for hours at a time? And can you do it in a busy, loud environment that's really sensory overwhelming? And if you can't do any one of those 5 things, there's a high chance that you're going to leave school without any qualifications, or at least with qualifications that don't reflect your potential. So that's the first reason, and I've worked in prisons. I've worked with people who are long-term unemployed since 2002. That was actually my first job as an occupational psychologist, was working with long-term unemployment. And, I used to see people and I think, my goodness, you've got no GCSEs. But I've just done a workshop with you for 3 or 4 hours. You are personable, insightful, funny.
Yeah.
How have you got no GCSEs? And then we bake these things into systems. So if you're really good at visual spatial reasoning, which you might be, you might have no GCSEs and be really, really good at visual spatial reasoning. You could be a bricklayer, an electrician, a hairdresser, but we've put basic English into the NVQs for all of those things.
Yes.
So you can't get those qualifications without also, I think they've slightly moved it now after years of me complaining about this and going to expert reference groups and moaning about it. I think they have finally listened. But, for a long time, you couldn't even do the job that would play to your strength because we've put a literacy barrier in the way.
Yeah, forget it.
It's just, what a waste of human potential.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
So mindless. Even if you do have some good qualifications, or at least some relevant qualifications that you can make a living out of, often you come out of the school system with anxiety, with a sense of rejection. I didn't go to school for 2 years. I had 2 years out of the secondary school system, 14, 15, 16. I did my GCSEs by educating myself at home with work that my teachers sent me.
Okay.
Yeah. And that
Why didn't you go to school?
Lots of reasons. I was stopping going to school from about 12. I was so good at truanting when I was 12 that my secondary school didn't have an example of my mother's handwriting. Every time there was a genuine letter, I would write it out myself so that they didn't have a signature to compare it to. So, I couldn't sit still for that long.
Yeah.
I can't concentrate in overwhelming lighting for very long. I can do it for a little bit, but not for a whole day. I don't like the hustle and bustle. I didn't enjoy the kids.
Yep.
I had friends outside school, but I didn't enjoy the kids in school. I found it kind of difficult the way they would have all this in-group, out-group nonsense. Like I can't play those games. Direct communicator.
Yeah.
I don't like those games. I don't want to play those games. They make me very unhappy and anxious.
Yeah.
So those are all the reasons I didn't go to school. But you go into the world of work with that kind of situation and you're vulnerable. You're vulnerable to feeling rejected. You might overreact to the slightest rejection. And we call that rejection sensitivity. And it's a thing that happens. So if you're rejection sensitive, you might think that people are against you when they're
Sure.
not, and you might treat them like they're not. So you might end up having difficulties in building relationships because you're so used to people being hostile towards you,
Yep.
or just weird and unusual and playing silly games like kids do at school. So you've got these kind of hang-ups, and it makes it quite hard to engage in the workplace and to build relationships and to make friends. And honestly, a lot of the coaching clients that I've seen and that we see at Genius Within, that is what they're going through.
Yeah.
They're trying to unpick, am I genuinely being discriminated against here? Or am I just being sensitive because I'm so used to being discriminated against? Like, what's going on? How do I sort that out? And, it's 50-50. It can be either way. And people need help and guidance to get back into a place where they trust themselves.
Yes.
And
they believe in themselves,
yes,
I guess.
Exactly. I mean, I've just written a book called Learning from Neurodivergent Leaders. It's a kind of book about the theory of leadership and why it's not really appropriate for marginalised leaders, and what would be appropriate, and some of my own experiences and all the things I got wrong. And then loads of stories from other neurodivergent leaders, people that work in corporates, people that do online influencing and community advocacy. And we've all got the same sort of story. And it's all about, we didn't trust ourselves. We didn't know what we had to offer. And so therefore we gave away too much.
Yeah.
And our boundaries got trampled all over.
Yeah.
And then that made us ill.
Yes.
And then we had to redraw our boundaries. And then in that process, we had to totally rearrange all our relationships because people were used to walking all over us.
Yes.
And then we finally found our feet, and it's, what are the stages of that? And how can we avoid that? How can we avoid people getting into those kind of dilemmas? And
why is it this way? All the guests that we've had on here, that there has to be pain and suffering and then rebirth and phoenix. And why is that?
It's wasteful, isn't it? I know.
I don't know if it's I don't know if actually it is needed or it's unnecessary.
Well, I don't know either. I mean, I was interviewed for someone's PhD. Someone was doing an education PhD, and they were using post-traumatic growth as their theoretical framework. And so
I like that.
I know. Well, post-traumatic growth is a genuine theory.
Is it?
Yes, yeah.
Oh.
Not everyone has post-traumatic stress disorder. Some people have post-traumatic growth.
Wow.
And actually, one of the most common trauma responses is perfectionism, which isn't the same as growth, but it isn't also a negative.
Yes.
So he was interviewing me about my experiences post-education. So obviously I'd had this very traumatic education, but now I've got a doctorate, I'm a visiting professor. Obviously I've had post-traumatic growth. I was like, okay, but I was in my late 30s before I was able to get properly on that train.
Yes.
I qualified as a psychologist in my 20s, but before I really hit my potential in terms of my PhD and my academic work, I was in my late 30s, early 40s. Like, there was a intervening 20 years.
Yeah.
Now, what would have happened if I hadn't been traumatized by education?
Yes.
And what would my career be like then? It just felt, I just felt like he was trying to make his point. And I just thought to myself, well, actually, I don't feel like that about it. I genuinely feel quite kind of sad and I feel sorry and sympathy for the young woman that I was who, was so unsure of herself, so frightened of life and, used to just give away things of myself for free all the time because I didn't know my value. And I feel sympathy for that young woman. And
I'm so surprised, having seen you talk, having read all your articles, seen you on social and LinkedIn. I'm so surprised to hear you say that because that's not who you come across as today.
No, but I understand that. Yeah, it's one of the reasons I wrote the book about leadership, because I just wanted to say to people, if you look at me from the outside now, what you're looking at is 20 years of coaching, of therapy, of personal development work, of healing.
Yes.
Like, I'm here because I've done healing. I've put in work into finding those boundaries, learning how to manage them without snapping them. Do you know, like, you know, when you first find your boundaries, you're like, right, everyone, bugger off. You appear to be transgressing my boundaries. You can all go away now. And that's not nice either. You know, so how do you kind of work with those in a soft and gentle way? That has taken me 20, 25 years. I left home when I was 16. I spent 4 years living in bedsits. I worked as a support worker and a carer for adults with learning disabilities and autism. And I gradually emerged into the psychologist that I am now. But you know, those years were very traumatic. There was a lot of risk. I was incredibly vulnerable. I don't know many people from that period of my life, but the people I do know, you know, if you'd asked them to say where I'd be at nearly 50, they wouldn't have said here. They would, you know. I actually met someone that I went to school with about 5 years ago. He went, "Oh my God, I thought you'd be dead by now." You know?
Yeah.
And so, you know, I just wanted to say to people, wherever you are, there's still hope. There is still hope.
And especially as so many people are being diagnosed, myself included, later in life, and feeling like, oh my God, I didn't know any of this.
No.
And now I do. That's incredibly empowering. It's up to me what I do with that information. But there is this, you know, Ellie Middleton talks about the lost generation and this time, this lag of unpotential.
Yeah, and I mean, the lost generations are all the generations that have gone before.
Yeah.
You know, older millennials, Gen X, the boomers, you know, and you can see the signs of neurodivergence in those generations and the unsupported kind of the lack of awareness that meant there was a lack of self-awareness and a lack of self-belief and self-appreciation. You can see it in the alcoholism rates.
Yeah.
You can see it in the divorce rates.
Yes.
You can see it in the early deaths.
Yep.
You know, you can see it in heart disease. You can see it in all those places. The people who have kind of held their stress and their story and their vulnerability and tried to make it through life with self-medicating, with alcohol, with food, with, you know, intense exercise or whatever it is they've done to survive. We're learning so much more about how we differ, you know, about how the school system, which is standardized, is going to not work for a sizable, well, for the hidden 20%, is not going to work for those people. And if you know, the trauma that's being experienced in that situation, let's get to the point where we don't have to traumatize those kids.
Yeah.
You know, I'm so worried about the level of trauma that's happening in schools right now. I really, really am. It's got worse. I mean, if you think about what I did, which is not go to school for 2 years, right? Now, there's an element, I stand at the intersection of ADHD, femaleness and whiteness.
Yes.
So, you know, I didn't get an ADHD diagnosis when I was a teenager because I'm a girl.
Yes.
And that was an issue.
Yes.
And instead I had lots of other diagnoses, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, school phobia, which was my favourite one. I didn't go ever again after that diagnosis. It was great. But, you know, the whiteness meant that I wasn't penalised for not going to school, that I was given the benefit of the doubt, that I was treated as someone who was vulnerable and we should feel sorry for, rather than someone who was bad and you know, avoiding going to school because she just had a motivational issue. So, but in today's world, there is no level of whiteness, there is no level of privilege that would allow me to simply just not go to school and for my teachers to send me the work.
Yeah.
I mean,
would not happen.
It just would not happen. I would have been in a pupil referral unit, or one of my parents would have had to homeschool me.
Been excluded.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly. So, you know, that is, I don't know how I would have survived. I genuinely don't. And I think the reason that I did get where I ended up getting to is because I didn't go to school for those 2 years. I stopped traumatizing myself. I had a barrier. I was like, no, I'm done. I'm done. I'm not doing that anymore. And actually that is where I began the process of healing, because that's where I started standing up for myself.
Yes.
And saying, I'm not going to put up with this anymore. It's making me ill. And, you know, in fairness, I was really ill. I wasn't just a demanding kid. I was in a psychiatric unit as an inpatient for a couple of months. Yeah. And it did make me very, very ill. But I was able to extricate myself from that situation. And I don't know how kids today can. And I'm desperately worried about what's happening to them and their families.
Yeah. Cary Grant talks about, you know, creating the environment in which you flourish. And listening to you, maybe it wasn't the environment in which you could flourish, but it was the environment in which you could survive, right? By not going to school.
Mm-hmm.
And like you say, children and the education system is not set up to even allow that to happen today.
No, attendance targets. I mean, let's talk about this. Attendance targets and awards for attendance. I mean, here you are, have an award for being able-bodied, not having any illnesses. I mean, what is that?
Yeah.
Seriously?
Yep, it doesn't make any sense. And so the education system is probably the biggest institution beyond, the world of sort of corporates and prisons and the army and all these big institutions. Like the education system involves a lot of people and therefore is structured, as you said, to be uniform, to be standardized and to operate at scale, which, when you got a classroom of 20, 30 kids and you got 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8 who could be neurodivergent, this is a problem.
And neurodivergent people, I think as well, we are more ill than we were 30, 40 years ago when I was at school, because we have a different sensory world to the one we had in the 80s.
Yep.
We are surrounded by beepy noise, electronic buzzing, things that demand our attention, over-processed food, and we're sensitive. Those things don't cause neurodivergence, but neurodivergent people are sensitive.
Yep.
Lots of us have gastrointestinal issues. Lots of us have epilepsy. Lots of us have various chronic fatigue. And so, whereas those 4 or 5 kids in the school in the 80s might have been able to survive primary education anyway, these days they can't, because by the time they get to school in the morning, they've already had sensory overwhelm. They're already at peak whelm before peak levels of whelm before they walk through the door,
I think there's a stat that 90% of excluded kids have some sort of special educational need, and the majority of those special educational needs are down to autism. And you're just like, this is,
I know
oh, this doesn't make any sense. What is going on? And so you talked about the then career prospect. You struggle in the education system, you come out, you don't know really what you're good at, a belief system that's been internalized and developed to be negative and harmful towards yourself. And then is it any wonder why loads of neurodivergent adults are not employed or diagnosed?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is the issue. And so, we're vulnerable. We go into the workplace not quite sure how to handle ourselves socially. We don't understand our potential or our worth. It's really hard for us to hold down a job.
Yep.
And if the people around us don't understand neurodivergence and don't get that people communicate differently, and you saying something direct isn't the same as them saying something direct, it doesn't mean you're cross or that you've lost patience. It means that you're trying to be really truthful so that you can move on from a position of agreement and get something done. They don't give you the benefit of the doubt, so you end up in these loops. People always say to me, why don't you work in schools? People say that to me all the time. And do you know why I don't? Because I cannot. I just cannot with that stuff. I feel like I am still too traumatized and too angry, and I wouldn't be able to keep my cool.
The Dr. Renato Fiallo, who diagnosed me, who's an absolute legend, she said something very similar in the sense of she won't work with children.
Yeah.
And I asked her why, and she said, because I'm going to be unwell.
Yeah, I know.
Like I'm in there, she's got kids, and this moral justice sense that I've learned is a trait.
It is, and we feel it. It's strong, and it can it can pull us into dark places.
Yeah, but what gives me so much hope and excitement is you take a body of people who have a strong sense of moral justice, who are willing to, on sort of discovering more about themselves, become in a really positive way evangelical about that and action orientated and impatient and impulsive and fast and all the good stuff that can come, and logical, and I'm talking just neurodiverse people as a whole. That, in terms of making change and benefiting the workplace and industry, I get really excited about.
Me too. It's kept my attention for decades, and
Yeah.
I get bored really easily. So, that in itself is quite useful. But yeah, I think that fervor and that kind of enthusiasm and change agentness of our community is fantastic. We've got to direct it in the right places.
Yep.
We've got to stop being grumpy with each other when someone new joins our online space and doesn't know the current popular language.
Yeah, let's talk about this.
We create psychological unsafety when we hyper police things. I know language is important. I know that it's really meaningful why words have changed, and it's really useful to support new entrants into the neurodiversity space with that knowledge. But sometimes it's too harsh, and we're scaring people, and we're upsetting people. And I think that's not what we want. That's not what we're trying to do. So I think we've got a job in the neurodiversity community to create safety, to heal, actually, because do you know what, when you're fervent and you're healed, you're powerful. When you're fervent and you're traumatized, you're often powerful, but sometimes you're also harmful. And I think that supporting community healing would be a great way forward. The people I know who are doing this the best right now, there are groups of Black women. So there's Marsha Martin, who runs Black Sen Mamas. There is Jeanette Morgan and Marcia Brissett Bailey, who run
Shout out to Marcia.
Yeah, who run the Black Leaders in an Excellence in Neurodiversity space. And when you come from an anti-racist, feminist background, you have done some of that work. You have done some of that healing work.
Without even realising it.
Yeah, do you know, I think I got just as much personal development out of anti-racist work as I did out of any coaching or therapy that I've been through. It's a different way of doing it, but it's still doing it. It's about kind of, self-investigation, reflexivity. How do I make the assumptions that I make? What are my biases? Can I address my biases? Can I have a strong enough ego state to acknowledge and be accountable for things I've done wrong, and then set out to fix them, or at least to acknowledge them? That takes work. That's healing work. You can't do that from a place of unheal. So I think that will come, and that's what I'm excited about. So if you want to know what I'm excited about, it's that intersectional neurodiversity, where as the neurodiversity space becomes less about white autistic men who do computer coding and becomes more about just an intersectional space, I think we're going to pull in more of those elements, and we need to take a back seat and let them lead, because they do know what they're doing.
Yes, and the piece I get a bit concerned about is all we want to do that hasn't been done is have the conversation and be able to put this in a bit of a nice warm spotlight and to talk about it, and the sort of censoring that goes on, or you can't say that, that's not right, don't say it like that, you offended, does exactly the opposite to what we actually want.
I know. But, it's part of group formation.
Okay.
So, you heard the whole kind of...
I mean, you're the organisational psychologist, so you tell us, Nancy.
But have you heard of sort of forming, norming, storming, forming?
Yes.
Yeah, it's storming. We're working out our group norms.
Okay.
We're working out the edges, our boundaries. What are the rules of being in this group, and it feels tense.
Yeah,
and it is difficult. And actually, I would be perfectly okay to just let that go if I wasn't aware that people were being harmed in the process. Vulnerable people are being harmed in the process. So I do feel urgent about getting us all to a better place.
It feels really vigilant at the moment.
Well, and we are a community of people who have hypervigilance. But it's also about boundaries within social media, isn't it? I mean, social media has become the wild west.
Yes.
LinkedIn has turned into Facebook. What's gone on there? Posts on professional networking sites that say things like, well, if you know, you know. Some people know all the things that have happened lately. I can't talk about them, but rah. Or there's the other one, which is, I'll share my vulnerabilities so that other people can feel better. And sometimes you look at those posts and you're like, is it okay that you're exploiting, is it okay that you're sharing things like that in professional networking states? Is that exploitative?
Is that okay?
Yes, I don't know that it is. I think we need to put some boundaries back around our social media use. And I think that would really help the neurodiversity community, because neurodivergent people aren't good at boundaries in the first place. We're not always sure where they should be. So we sometimes go over them and sometimes we don't go anywhere near them. And that's an issue. But particularly with social media, because we are much more likely to form relationships when we don't have to have sensory overwhelm and we're inside and we're via our computer. That's a nice safe space where we can physically decompress but not be lonely, and that's really important, that not being lonely. So I think we are uniquely vulnerable to it. Yeah, I really do. And I hope that we start to develop some norms as a society around switching social media off at certain times a day. I posed a question on LinkedIn a little while ago. I said, when you're on LinkedIn, is this work? Do you consider this work? And it was about 50-50 people who did, or who didn't.
Yeah.
Now, I consider LinkedIn work.
Yes.
I'm not on LinkedIn at the weekend.
No,
And
I'm
not
going to learn, and see what's going on and absorb and read. And
if I do go on to post something at the weekend, it's because I've made a conscious choice to work at the weekend. Maybe something's happened and I want to get a Forbes blog out, whatever. But for me, it's definitely work. And for lots of people, it isn't work. And I think that's where we need better boundaries.
Yeah, it gets a bit blurry.
Yeah.
And I think it gets grey. For people who are listening, watching, who are working and newly diagnosed, on a waiting list, where do those boundaries sit in terms of how much do I share with my boss? How much should I say? Do I have to say? Yeah, what are some guiding principles from what you've learned for people who are at work and not sure whether to talk about this or not?
Well, interestingly, I supervised a master's degree student who made this her thesis.
Okay,
yeah.
nice.
She did a series of interviews with neurodivergent people and asked them what were the signals that let them know whether it was safe to disclose or not while they were in the job searching process.
Okay.
And she came up with some absolutely brilliant stuff. So, that's why language is important. If they're using up-to-date language, it signals that they have taken the time to learn. The ability, offering adjustments. So lots of companies, my company does this as well, but lots of people just offer adjustments. So if you want, if you need any adjustments in this process, here's how you do it, here's who you contact, which shows that they've thought about that, they've prepared for that. It's not as simple as, do you have a disability, tick that box. It's like, no, we're genuinely interested in shaping things.
And broad enough, right?
Yes,
not, are you neurodivergent or are you disabled or...
Just do you need any adjustments in the recruitment process? Absolutely. And what we do at Genius Within is here's a list of things we've done before. So that it's even stronger of a signal. We're asking this so that we can work with you, not because we're trying to weed you out. So that's another strong signal. So language, the way they approach adjustments. Sometimes the participants had asked for an adjustment and noticed the response that they got. Now, this works. So this signalling theory in recruitment is not new. It's been used in looking at racial justice work, in gender work, lots of places it's been used before. But interestingly, in those other spaces, the results tend to be that if you don't get the right signals, you leave the recruitment process and you go and find a job somewhere else. But my master's student, Holly Miller, who is a fantastic researcher, I just need to give her name and her props for her work. But what Holly found with the neurodivergent people is that lots of them had got the wrong signals, but carried on with the recruitment process because they were so worried about not having a job.
Okay.
So they were knowingly putting themselves into harm's way. They weren't, because of the joblessness in our community.
So they knew they basically wouldn't have their needs met and it maybe wasn't going to be the best fit.
But they felt like they had no choice.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because that hasn't come through in this research before, which is Holly's lovely contribution, which is why she needs to publish the work, and it's very good.
Do you think people should disclose their neurodivergence at work?
It does depend. Psychological safety at work is very clearly signalled by watching what happens to other people. Are there other people in the business who are disclosed with anything?
Yes.
Not just neurodivergence, but maybe multiple sclerosis or a mental health condition, various things. But the thing is if you can't disclose, should you be in that job?
Yeah.
That's the other thing. So it's almost like disclose, and if you don't get the response you want, be prepared to leave.
Yes, because it should be a choice.
Yes. Yeah.
A right.
Yeah. Can we just leapfrog to the stage with neurodiversity where it just becomes something that we talk about that's really,
So I give you a magic wand.
Yeah, totally. 10 years' time, boof. Oh, yeah, you're an ADHDer. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I think Jeff in accounts is an ADHDer. Anyway, what are we doing next week for that presentation? Like that's the way in the 80s we used to talk about vegetarians, Oh, so-and-so's gone vegetarian. Oh, really? Jeff's a vegan. Is vegan? No, just vegetarian. Anyway, what should we watch on TV? It was something that you might say as an aside, but it wasn't a thing.
Yes.
And that's where we need to get to with neurodivergence. It needs to be not a thing.
No.
The goal is that everyone can do their best. The goal is that we don't waste human potential. The goal is that people are free to be as ambitious as they want to go in the directions that they want to. The goal is human capacity, human ambition, community, surviving through collaboration. And that's got to be good for everybody. I mean, come on. I think what we're really talking about is personalisation of workplaces and education systems. So there's a huge move to personalised medicine.
Yes.
The standard dose for the standard person that will work for the average person most of the time. And we're going, ooh, what about the people in the margins? Should we work out how to personalise this? And data is helping us do that. So that's what's happening in medicine. More and more personalised protocols for cancer treatment, for HRT.
Possible.
It is possible, absolutely. So I think we need to take that same principle of personalisation and go, that's what goes with the technology age. So in the industrial age, we had standardisation, we had homogenization, and out of that, we had to start labeling people as dyslexic. We had to call people ADHD because otherwise we couldn't give them what they needed. But now we're in the technology age, the industrial age is over. So we need to move our workplaces and our education systems into the technological age, and that is about using data to personalize environments. Data-led inclusion. How can I work out what the needs are in this space so that I can allow enough variance in the environment for more people to be able to thrive?
And we might not have the exact right tools yet, but we have the capability.
We do.
We do. Tech gives us the perfect.
And I think what I'm doing and what the Portsmouth Protocol is doing is starting that journey. Let's start gathering data in a way that allows us to predict what kind of variance we're going to need. So if we had a workplace where there are a bunch of people like you, that's my business case for a refurb of the office.
Yes.
Or the workshop.
Yes.
It's, if I'm in manufacturing, it's my business case for a decompression room.
Yeah.
It's my business case for adjusting the shift schedule so that people can travel to work when it's not really busy, so they don't arrive at work full of commuter overwhelm.
Yeah.
That's where I think we should be going.
People like Dave Brailsford and what he did with the Sky team and marginal gains and the All Blacks. It's all the same kind of stuff, right?
It really actually is, exactly. Marginal gains. It's productivity, it's performance, it's ambition, it's potential.
And that's nothing to do with neurodivergence.
No, I mean, we need to level up as a species.
Yeah.
We have got a lot of problems right now. We have got a lot of things that are on our to-do list as humans. Human to-do list. Number 1, the ocean. Number 2, the air. These are big things that we need to deal with.
Number 3, survive.
Number 4, all the other creatures on this earth that are trying to survive, that actually are part of a very, very finely balanced biodiverse sphere.
Yes.
So how are we going to do that if we're suppressing the contribution of 20% of the population?
Yes. So if you're an employer listening and you're interested because you're listening, thank you, but you don't know what to do next, what can you do?
So you might want to start an employee resource group. Employee resource groups are a very good place to start, but don't end there. I've seen lots of employee resource groups where they end up being the go-to people for working out adjustments, for listening to problems. That's not their job. Their job is to go, right, what would work in this organisation? Do we need to go down an e-learning route? Do we need to go down some formal training? Do we need to work with occupational health? Do we need an adjustments process? What's going to work for this company? And they might start scoping that. You definitely want to put someone from HR in there, because if HR ain't on board, it's not happening. No. So, have that happen, do it that way, scope it. But if you don't have the resources for an employee resource group, do start with HR. I think HR are an underused resource in neurodiversity. HR get brought in when it's all gone wrong. They get brought in when it's disability discrimination tribunal.
Sure.
They get brought in when someone's on capability assessment for their job or performance management. Bring them in earlier. Talk to them. Go, right, let's have a look at your cases for the last 6 months. What were they all about? Oh my goodness. That actually 50% of them were about people who weren't able to concentrate and kept making mistakes or taking extra time. That's telling me something.
Yes.
So the past is the best predictor of the future.
Yep.
You've already got data. You've got exit interviews. You've
Yes.
got performance and capability issues. Look at those things and go, how could I better buffer those things by taking care of the sensory environment, by thinking about the way we store information and the way people interact with technology, by looking at the scheduling of the workload. Those are the things we should be doing. Start there.
So the other body of people are the people we talked about earlier who are unemployed. And you gave that group of people some acute focus and attention with your BBC series, Employable Me. Why did you do that?
Well, I've worked with unemployment for a very long time, and I was unemployed as a teenager living in bedsits, and I hung out with a lot of unemployed people. And I think you have to show the journey. You have to show that the journey is not easy. I want people to have a bit more respect for how hard it is, for the challenges. And I think unemployed people are a political football. If you read a left-wing paper, they're people we should feel sorry for. If you read a right-wing paper, they're people we should blame. They are often, are treated as this homogenous group of feckless or, uniquely kind of sad and lonely people. And actually, unemployed people are people. They have got things going on in their lives that might make working not the best choice for them, actually. And I thought what I liked about the Employable Me series was the variety of clients that we had and they call them participants, I think. But the clients were really interesting, a range of ages, a range of backgrounds. And there was one journey in the second...
A range of challenges as well, right? This wasn't hey, here's some neurodivergent people, for example.
Totally. And so I wanted people to get some respect and some understanding of the diversity of what happens when you're unemployed, and to see the challenge of overcoming disability to get into employment. And I think there was a lovely show with a wheelchair user who literally could not get to her interview because of the bus journey and the pavements and the
stairs.
Totally. She literally couldn't even get to the interview. And then there was another chap who had chronic arthritis, and it was too painful for him to use his hands. So his bones had become so sharp and jagged that every time he moved his hands, they were literally starting to sever the tendons. It was, excruciating to even hear him talk about it. And he had been a youth worker. And the reason he'd stopped being a youth worker is because he couldn't write reports. So he couldn't do safeguarding. He couldn't write up notes of what was happening with people. And we showed him text to speech, speech to text and text to speech software so that he could just talk into a microphone and write reports. And honestly, why isn't that stuff standard when you're unemployed? He was unemployed for years for the want of a bit of technology, which is actually now standard on everybody's phones.
Yes.
But you can get more specialists to make it more easy. And that's just liberating there. And so showing his story, my hope is other people were watching that and going, oh my goodness, there's this technology. Hope. Hope.
Yeah.
People need hope.
I think we have this view of, I'm generalizing here, but I think we have this view that unemployed people don't want jobs.
I know. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Do you know, a lot of unemployed people I've worked with feel like they don't want to try anymore.
Okay.
Because if you try a certain number of times and you get knocked back every single time, you have to protect your esteem and your ego and your sense of wholeness. There's only so much rejection someone can take, and that feels totally understandable to me. I mean, I used to get asked in the early 2000s to run motivational programs in bunny ears, and I used to say to myself, good God, we are not calling it that. People, it's not motivation that's the
David
problem.
Brent.
It's a lack of hope.
Yes.
If they had hope that they could get a job that they liked, that they would feel safe in, that they could thrive in, that would pay them enough money to live, then they would do it. But, it's the lack of hope that is driving people away from the job market, and also a lack of kind of understanding of how the job market works. So 70% of jobs are never advertised. So if you're starting your employment journey by looking for things that have been advertised on recruitment sites, your chances of success are very low. They're less than 25% because you're competing with 500 other people. As an employer, putting an advert out is the last thing I do when I'm looking for a job. The first thing I do is I look at who I've already got.
Of course.
The second thing I do is I look at who's contacted me speculatively recently, who's sent me a CV just out of the blue.
Yep.
I'm going to call those people because I know they want to work.
Yes.
And I know that they're proactive, that they think for themselves, and I know they want to work for me because they've, so
exactly.
I'm going to go through them. The third thing I might do is speak to people in the business, say,
Yes.
do you know anyone? The fourth thing I might do is I might go to a recruitment company, and I'm not advertising that job until I've been through all of those other layers. And so, when I used to tell people that, they used to go, oh, wow, okay, so how do we get around that? And I go, right, we are going to start cold calling. We are going to start sending CVs out speculatively.
Yes.
And, we worked out the numbers on this, and it would take for every 33 applications, 1 interview, and 3 interviews for 1 job. So I used to say to them, this is a numbers game.
Yes.
If you make 100 applications, you're pretty much guaranteed a job.
Yeah.
So let's think of 100 companies that you want to work for, get busy on the internet, let's scope them out, and let's start contacting them. And we'll start with the ones that you least want to work for so that you can practice your patter. But people don't know that. That is one of the unwritten rules of society, how you get work.
Yeah, I totally agree. You don't get that at school.
No, you definitely don't get that at school. Sadly, you don't often get that at the job centre. But what they're not telling you is about the hidden job market. What they're not telling you is about how you can influence that yourself and have more independence and agency over how and where you look for work.
Yeah.
It's really important to know what kind of company you want to work for.
Yes, and
really
especially within, I think, the world of neurodivergence.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're not all suited to all kinds of
Oh
companies.
God, no. I mean, I haven't had a boss since I was 25.
Yeah.
I'm pretty much unmanageable at this point.
And then go and reach out to those companies or brands or whatever that you love.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
Start there. That is a great place to start.
And that requires confidence, and it requires a bit of self-appreciation. You need to be reasonably okay with what you can do and have that self-belief.
Makes me want to talk about how much you kind of bring of yourself to a job, how masking, being authentic, sharing too much, interviews, etc. I loved what you wrote, that basically, if I can very pithily summarize, let's not all get carried away with unmasking.
Yeah.
And I definitely feel this and notice this myself, of I'm way more unmasked than I've ever been, but I'm still very highly masked when I need to be.
Yeah. Yes, that is such a lovely point, actually, Ben. When you need to be, you have the choice and you can put that mask back on.
Yeah.
Do you know, if you're choosing to put the mask back on, it doesn't feel as heavy.
No.
But it's also privileged to have the choice.
100%.
And I think the thing that we don't talk about enough in when we talk about masking is the people who don't have the choice, the people who cannot mask, whose needs are much more intense than that, and they have not got the ability to mask.
Yes.
And how there's an intersectional loop to that. So if you come from a Black or brown community, an inability to mask is potentially life-threatening. So, when we're talking about masking like it's this awful thing, in some communities it's life-saving.
Yes,
It protects you. And it protects you in lots of places, whether you're worried about the police or healthcare or not, whether it's just in the workplace, masking is a protective mechanism.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to healing again, because if you've been on that healing journey and you understand, you've got self-awareness, you've learned enough about yourself to learn when it would be a good idea for you to mask and when it isn't, then that masking process feels like a choice rather than an obligation. But I'm choosing to mask, and I have learned how to mask. And when I first started learning about behavior and developing self-awareness, when I was learning psychology, when I was practicing, when I was learning coaching, I had kind of there was quite a lot of behaviorist themes around me, and I got quite a lot of feedback about how scary I was, how fierce I was, how powerful I was, and I didn't know I was powerful at that point, and I felt awful about it because I'd just been walking around as a little bag of anxious need, for this little crumbly bag of porous anxious need that had no buffer to anybody. And then I suddenly found out that that's not how people saw me, that lots of people saw me as this kind of quite fierce, threatening, overbearing person. I was like, oh my God, that's awful. So I learned how to suppress that.
Yes.
And I would call that masking.
Yes.
And initially when I learned how to suppress that, it was awful because it came from a place of self-chastisement.
Yeah, of
It came from a place of feeling judged. But I did learn something that is very useful. And I developed self-awareness. I think self-awareness is the key. It's not about masking or unmasking. It's being aware about your feelings, how you communicate when you feel in a certain way, and the impact that has on other people. And can you choose to have that impact, or can you choose to not have that impact?
Yeah.
And if you get to the point where you can choose, then, it becomes a very healed and influential and powerful place, actually.
Yeah, I certainly don't see it as I'm masking or I'm unmasking or a conscious decision of, let me pick the mask up. It's more natural. I guess the difference is I'm not doing it all the time.
Yes. Well, and that's been one of
really
the beautiful things about the neurodiversity movement, is that we don't have to do it all the time anymore. And we've got, we can use words like stimming. We can use words like sensory overwhelm, or I'm out of spoons, or my social battery.
Yep.
We've got a lingo.
Yeah, we can say no.
Yes, and we can talk to each other about these things, and we've got safe spaces. So yeah, being able to let the lid off and kind of decompress from the masking space is absolutely gorgeous.
And it does feel,
it helps,
an absolute privilege.
Yeah.
Having not done it and not even known that I could, to then be able to and understand the difference. You're like, this is, God, I want this for everyone.
Yeah, totally. Well, I have a weird one because, Genius Within is majority neurodivergent. So do we mask at work or do we not mask at work? I do still mask at work.
Yeah.
I mask at work a lot because I'm one of the bosses.
Sure.
When I was in the CEO role, I had to mask all the time, even at work, which was too heavy for me, which is why I'm not the CEO anymore. And I found a woman whose genius within is to be a CEO. Yes, the lovely Jackie, who is neurodivergent in a different way to me as a dyslexic. So yeah, so I still have to mask because even in a neurodivergent majority company, we've got different patterns and preferences. And my what I call spontaneity looks like chaos and feels like chaos to some people. There's the two sides of every coin, isn't there? Sometimes I am direct, sometimes I am too blunt, and it's rude. And it can be the same behaviour in a different context. So it is all about developing that self-awareness and working out, what's the reciprocal thing here, and who's got the most resources at the moment to be flexible. I ask this lovely question when I'm doing an undergraduate lecture on neurodiversity. I say, if there's a difference in communication style, whose job is it to be flexible? And they always say the manager, all of them.
Interesting.
And I go, okay, so what if the employee is, let's say they're 25 years old, they live at home with their parents, but they're very happy doing that. They're just saving up money to move out. It's just them. They've got quite a stable home system. And the manager is a single parent with 3 disabled children, one of whom has stopped going to school recently and doesn't sleep at night. Now whose job is it to flex? Yeah. And they go, oh. And I go, yeah. Managing isn't mummying. It's not being a parent. It's not, being two adults in a workplace is a reciprocal conversation. Yeah. So when you're in a majority neurodivergent company, you can't go, well, I'm the neurodivergent, so everyone has to flex to me.
Exactly. The only one other thing I would say on masking is and this is perspective. I think when I first heard about masking, my head went to, oh, that's pretending. Oh, I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah.
Do people think I'm being a fraud, or I've been faking it, or it feels like a negative thing. And actually, it's not. I don't now see it as a negative thing. Masking is an important tool in my toolbox that means that I am privileged to be able to mask, to go and stand on a stage, or do this podcast, or do these things, and that I have that choice. And yeah, I want to. We just love black and whites as a human race.
Well,
and
particularly in
love
this
grey.
community.
I love grey. That uncomfortableness of, it's not masking or unmasking. It's both, and it's all of it, and it's different for different people at different times, and we have to embrace this. It's just a bit grey.
Flexibility and choice has got to be the key to this, right? Flexibility, having the flexibility to shift very slightly the way you do things in order to maintain relationships, in order to get what you want, actually, and to, feel part of a community. That's perfectly normal. That's every human, needs to be able to do that in order to have a job and to go to work and to possibly have a family or whatever. That's part of it, give and take, isn't it? And I do think self-awareness is the key to that. And you get that through coaching, you get that through working on yourself, you get that through doing anti-racist training, various things you can do. People do that through church groups, through other faith groups, through meditation. There are so many ways you can get to know yourself and your reactions. And that's where you get that choice and flexibility from, is self-knowledge. And my goodness, I mean, I'm nearly 50 and I do not feel like I'm nailing this still. I still overspill. I still get it wrong and I'm too direct in meetings and everyone goes, that these things still happen. But also there's got to be enough psychological safety that you can get it wrong sometimes and that's still okay.
Yeah.
Hasn't there? It's much easier for me to demask in a space where I know that if I say the wrong thing or I overspill, if I apologize for that, I will be forgiven.
Yeah.
And that's the other basis. So there's
it
self-awareness.
Sets the tone.
Yeah.
It
totally.
really does set the tone. Thank you for everything that you do. And I love watching on LinkedIn. I can sort of, although I don't know you, I can sort of like see your brain in action, because I can see the immediacy of, you read something that you don't agree with or that isn't true, or a headline comes out, and then you hop on it and you write a brilliant piece, and boom, it's up on Forbes. And so that feedback loop, when everybody's looking for clarity, coming from someone with great credibility, is so important, because there's loads going on in this space. There's loads of research happening. There's loads of myths. There's loads of truths. People are trying to figure out what the hell's going on. And here, it's really important to us that, above anything else, it might not necessarily be all the right answers or all the truths, but at least there's clarity. And that the people that come and sit in the green chair are coming from a place of, like, I have a point of view, I have an opinion, it might be based on X, Y, and Z, but I'm going to bring that and I'm going to share that, and there'll be clarity, rather than it being sort of wishy-washy or based on nothing or a TikTok trend, etc. So thank you. So I want to paint a little picture for people listening or watching. We had a call yesterday to kind of go through how everything was going to work. And we asked you to bring an item that represents your brain. And there was such a beautiful moment. Bella and I were on the Zoom and you were off the Zoom because you'd gone.
I'd gone to look for it.
You'd gone to look for it. I could see your head just go, oh my God, I know what I want to find. I know what I want to bring. And then you couldn't find it. And then another lightning bolt struck because you thought about the bag and the bag of things that I'm going to ask you about in a second. And then you wanted to tell us about the back. Then you wanted to
I
take
know, I
us
was
through
totally
the ice.
demasked, wasn't I? Being my neurodivergent self. Okay, I've lost it. I can't find it. Oh, I found these things. These are interesting. Okay, now I've got it. Let me tell you everything about it.
It was such a I wish
I
we'd
know.
record. It was such a, and yeah, I know we can laugh about it, but it was a really, it was
We still finished the call on time, and we did everything that we were supposed to do.
We got everything done,
Yeah.
and it was just a really beautiful moment. So, what item did you bring for us today, Nancy, that represents your brain?
So I have brought my bag of symbolic objects. I've had this bag for over 20 years with symbolic objects that have gradually added to over the years. But what I use this for is in coaching or training. Sometimes things are better experienced without words. And I think particularly in our community as well, sometimes words are hard to find. Some people have alexithmia, which is it's a thing where you can't name emotions very easily. And sometimes we need to tap into our creative insight and stop overthinking things and just go with our intuition. So I use this bag I kind of get it out and I spread it all out on the floor, and I might be asking somebody to choose a symbolic object that represents how they learn at their best, or how they work at their best, or a goal that they want to work towards. And they choose something, and then we share the stories of why they've chosen that object and why it represents what their goal or their ideal state that they're trying to get to. So it's been the source of an enormous amount of self-development work, awareness, self-awareness work, and joy. And it's also quite funny, particularly if you're doing this in a corporate setting, because at some point, everyone sort of realizes that they're dressed for work and actually they're just, running around with a bag of weird things. So there's a paintbrush, there's a baby's hairbrush, there's a cat collar, there's a small wooden train, a train ticket, a nice round button. Yeah.
Do you think your brain's like this?
Yes, this represents my brain, because my brain is usually quite full of random things.
Yep.
There's a lot of noise in there. It's not quiet.
But it's contained.
But it is contained. And the things that are in my brain are usually quite meaningful. They are symbolic. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about what colour I want to paint the bathroom.
Yes.
Actually, I spend a lot of time thinking about politics and world peace and meaningful relationships. So that's why it represents my brain.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you. That was so much fun.
Because I'm autistic, I think differently. And back in 2015, I wanted people to drink differently. So I created Seedlip, the world's first distilled non-alcoholic spirits. I took Seedlip from my kitchen to 35 countries and the world's best bars, restaurants, and retailers. And we did it in 3.5 years. It was wild. They're delicious. They're intriguing. They're these distilled botanical blends you can just mix with tonic or have in a cocktail. You really don't need another sickly, horrible mocktail. Check us out on seedlipdrinks.com or Amazon and let me know what you think.